Welcome to week 4 of RAFF 6205. This is the summer session in 2020, and it's session A. This week in number 4, we're going to talk about good clinical practices, or GCPs. We're going to talk about a little bit about tobacco products, and I added a module last week involving corporate compliance programs and plans. And I'll tell you about a strong bias I have about corporate compliance plans when we get down into it. But let's get into our PowerPoint slides. There's about 25 of them, so I'll go through them as expeditiously as I can because I want to be mindful about the demands of this course on your time. So let's take a look at our slides, and I'll point out that this is the halfway point. Congratulations. Again, we're going to be talking about GCPs and tobacco products and compliance programs and plans. I'll remind you that a part of your legal analysis and evaluation paper project is due by Sunday of week number 5, and that's the rule, issue, and question summary. And there's detailed information about how to do an RIQ in the Blackboard materials under resources. So take a look at that and submit your RIQ promptly and on time. So with that introduction, let's jump into good clinical practices, or GCPs, and what they are actually standards that are articulated in federal rules that govern clinical trials or studies. So when we think about GCPs, we always need to remember that even though they're standards, they appear in federal rules, which are just about the equivalent of federal law. It's the next best thing to a federal statute. So it's important to know what they are and comply with them. They have ever so many parameters, and I've put them in this second bullet point, and you can see how logical those parameters are. It begins with the design, the conduct, performance, and goes all the way through recording, analysis, and reporting. So that's important to keep this overview in mind as we talk about GCPs. Now, they've got ever so many lofty goals: protecting humans, their rights, and safety and welfare, and assuring quality, reliability, and integrity of data. And one of the GCP goals is to have compliant standards and guidelines for clinical research. And for goodness sake, GCP compliance has to do literally with the very survival of the organization. If we let GCP goals slip, we're going to get nailed and probably be put out of business. GCP involves ethical considerations, and I gathered ever so many of those parameters, and I've put them in this slide, and I haven't animated it because all I want you to do is let your eye go down this list, and you can see the importance of the ethical considerations that are embodied in GCPs with the Nuremberg Code, the Helsinki Declaration, the Belmont Report, and some international conference guidelines and some international standards that are summed up in the federal rules appearing in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR. So ethical considerations are through and through GCP. So let's talk a little bit about some examples of those federal rules. And I've got a resource for you in the Blackboard materials that's more in-depth than this, but these are just examples of some of the federal rules. And it's not important for you to remember now the citations, but look at the topics: electronic records and signatures, protection, financial disclosure, IRBs, investigational device exemptions, and then PMA approvals of medical devices. And you can see all of those are in Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations. And there's more information about these rules in Blackboard this week. So let's talk about some principles of GCPs. They embody ethics, protocol and science, responsibilities, informed consent, and I'll let you read the remainder of these principles just to get a grasp and a feel for how wide and thorough these principles are. GCP is used in clinical research. It's involved with protocols for institutional review board projects and their required valid informed consent, monitoring plan, event reporting, documentation, and data collection and reporting procedures. So that's kind of an overview of GCP. Keep in mind that they are standards articulated in federal rules, and there's ever so many of them. So that's the first of 3 parts of today's lecture. Let's go now to tobacco. And we want to start by looking at the Tobacco Control Act. And what it does, as kind of an overview, just always remember that tobacco is the only consumer product regulated by FDA that causes disease, disability, and death when used as intended. FDA regulates tobacco under a public health standard, and what it will do is evaluate the risk and or benefit as it relates to the entire population. And then in 2009, the Congress enacted the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act. And what that provoked is a significant increase in government oversight, primarily through the FDA, pre-market approval of new tobacco products, for example, restrictions on distribution, advertising, and new record-keeping and reporting requirements. That statute is in the Blackboard resources for this week. And as a result of this act, FDA jurisdiction over tobacco products was expanded under the FDA's deeming clause. And I'm going to be talking in a little detail about the deemer clause in a later slide. But just understand that the key to understanding tobacco control is knowing the subjects and topics and the prohibitions set forth in this legislation. The legislation has several prohibitions, and the first thing is industry is prohibited in interstate shipment or interstate shipping of adulterated and or misbranded tobacco products. Now, adulterated tobacco is filthy, putrid, or decomposed substances, or something that's been added that's poisonous or deleterious, something that's made under unsanitary conditions or manufactured not conforming to good manufacturing conditions. And we're going to talk about GMP in a week or so. Now, misbranded products are are either false or misleading, or fail to include specified information, fail to conspicuously bear required statements, and they are coming from an unregistered establishment. So these prohibitions, although they're easy to articulate, are sometimes complex and difficult to comprehend. But we can work toward compliance. And one of the ways that that's done is contracted inspections of on-site and of manufacturing facilities, and FDA reviews of pre-market approvals, warning labels, advertisements, and annual registrations. And then advisory actions such as warning letters, and then finally enforcement actions, civil money penalties, which we talked about a week ago, criminal prosecution, seizure, injunction, plus a new wrinkle in tobacco enforcement: no tobacco sales orders. And as of August of last year, about 170 no tobacco sales orders had been issued by the FDA. Now, most of those involved repeat violation of tobacco sales to minors. Now, the FDA focuses on tobacco products, and it does that through its Center for Tobacco Products, and its job is to protect young people and educate consumers, and then they're responsible for compliance, research, and review of new products and product changes. Now, that's the Center for Tobacco Products is also responsible for monitoring manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of products. I told you a moment ago that we'd be looking at the deeming rule, and I'd like to do that next. The deeming rule was issued in May of 2016, and what that does, the effect was to extend the FDA's authority to all categories of tobacco products other than accessories. So the deeming part of it, if the item is a tobacco product as defined in the statute and rules, it is deemed to be under FDA regulation. So the best way to understand that is those that are using technology to come up with new tobacco-related products like vaping are going to be swept under FDA regulation by virtue of this deeming rule. Now, the deeming rule includes components or parts, and I thought it was very interesting, and I want to emphasize it for your benefit, that it includes software or materials that alter or affect performance. And always keep in mind that word software, because we're talking about applications. And of course, with the promulgation of the deeming rule, there were immediate challenges to not only the rule, but its implementation schedule. And those challenges are still pending when I checked earlier this morning. Now, the FDA has got some ambitious plans for tobacco and nicotine regulation, and they've tried to centralize those efforts, as I've mentioned before, by having policies addressing tobacco addiction, the appeal of tobacco, and cessation of tobacco usage. And they're going to try to do this through a science-based review of tobacco products, and through that come up with a youth tobacco prevention plan. With respect to addiction, tobacco appeal, and cessation, the goal is to lower nicotine in cigarettes to new standards, regulate flavored products, and regulate premium cigars. One of the things that FDA is trying to do, and I see it frequently here in Tallahassee on local TV by ads from the Florida Department of Health about helping people quit. And what these ads do is it increases access to medicinal nicotine products and educates the public and corrects misperceptions about nicotine. Some of the commercials here in Florida, and perhaps where you are, have just individuals that have been gruesomely got gruesome effects of smoking and surgeries to eradicate compromised areas. Another thing that the FDA is doing is improving the application process. There's been recent rulemaking activities in several important areas: pre-market tobacco applications, modified risk tobacco products, and then reporting to demonstrate substantial equivalence. And Title 21 in that part that I'm showing you talks about substantial equivalence reports. FDA is involved in implementing product safety standards to prevent vape battery explosions, to reduce children's exposure to liquid nicotine, and address e-cigarettes. And it's going to try to do that through its Youth Tobacco Prevention Plan to try to help the young people stop using and restrict their access to tobacco products, especially e-cigarettes. And it's going to try to do that through research about their access and the way those products are marketed, and to try to teach the young people the serious side effects of tobacco. They'll also get involved in public education, and they're going to try to come up with innovative approaches to do this and discourage young people from smoking, especially multicultural teens. And I've put in here some of those aspects: the hip hop, LGBT, and there are other categories, but the key here is multicultural. And that's kind of an overview of tobacco. I want to close today's session by talking about corporate compliance plans and programs. And again, I want to disclose in advance my strong bias in favor of corporate compliance programs and plans. And that bias, I think, is well justified, because in my career as a practicing lawyer for healthcare providers, I had firsthand proof of the benefit of corporate compliance plans, because those clients that had a robust, working, and effective corporate compliance program often stayed out of trouble, and if they got in trouble, it helped them get out. Now, why are they important? Well, violations can occur in any healthcare organization, and perpetrators and corporations can be held liable. Now, corporate compliance programs gained prominence after the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations were issued. Now, those guidelines are used by federal judges for sentencing people convicted of crimes. So they've converted those sentencing guidelines into compliance programs. And A good compliance program is a very effective tool to what? To minimize fraud and abuse exposure. They're even mandatory under ACA. And I have to tell you that a corporate compliance program that isn't used, is not obeyed, or not implemented can be used by the governments, state and federal, as a reason to increase fines, prison terms, and sanctions. So folks, if we're gonna have a corporate compliance program, you better use it, because if you don't, it's gonna backfire. The parts of a corporate compliance program is going to have at least 4 separate parts. Standards. What are our standards? What are we going to hold ourselves to? What are our policies about those standards? The procedures and forms. We need to have high-level oversight in our company, and we don't want to be seen hiring people previously convicted of health care offenses or excluded from Medicare or the Medicaid programs. And I'm an absolute freak about the education and training of our personnel on our corporate compliance plan, because if our people don't know how to comply, you're not going to get compliance. And a couple of ways to help accomplish that is to use hotlines and audits to ensure compliance, and then robust discipline when, not if, when discipline needs to be administered to those who violate our standards, policies, procedures, and forms. We need to continually reassess and revise our compliance plans. Things change very rapidly in the FDA environment. Some benefits: they help prevent fraud, abuse, and waste. They promote legal compliance and corporate integrity. They help mitigate sanctions that might be imposed, and they help guide the governing body and management through the minefield of FDA regulations and enforcement. Just as important, it helps us as practitioners and employees achieve and document quality of care, and then it reduces exposure to whistleblower suits. You just had a discussion board situation involving a threatened whistleblower suit. CCPs help reduce exposure to those. And it proactively focuses on ethical integrity through education and information sharing. And I'm not done yet, because there's some value-added benefits. If you have a corporate compliance plan, one of the first things that the inspectors will ask is if you have one, or the U.S. attorney, or the state attorney general. And when you say, here it is, and you don't have to dust it off from lack of use, that demonstrates your commitment to honest, ethical, and responsible product. You gotta love that. It'll improve your billing practice, thus increase your revenues. And that means to the extent that you bill properly, you get to keep it and it won't be recouped. It'll be a centralized source for healthcare statutes, rules, and regulations, and it'll help identify and prevent criminal and unethical conduct. Finally, it will identify weaknesses in systems and management and expose possible fraud and abuse by those working for us and with us, and it'll help our employees report to us. Finally, it'll facilitate prompt, thorough investigation and corrective action. So you can see, I'm a I am a cheerleader for CCPs, and I don't apologize for that at all. Now, next week, we're in number 5. We're going to talk about good manufacturing processes, quality systems regulation, and then chemistry, manufacturing, and controls. I hope you're enjoying this course, and I hope you're tolerating this coronavirus period of sheltering in place. I don't know about you, but I'm getting quarantine fatigue, and working with you every day helps me overcome that. And this will conclude today's lecture, and I'll see you next time.